Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie Boozer with CUGC HQ. I am thrilled to welcome you to today's user share. We're going to talk about getting started with Citrix Cloud REST APIs. And I think you've probably all read the description for this webinar, but this is for multiple skill levels. So I'm really excited to hear what these guys have to say today. But before we get started, just want to make you aware of a couple of events we have coming up, actually more than a couple of events. Next week, we have 2 webinars. We have Citrix on Nutanix clusters with Jari and Gibson, and then we have a webinar with Liquid. They're new to CUGC, so this is their first webinar with us. That will be on Thursday, so check those out. Also next week, it's a busy week, we have our CUGC XL Central. That is a full afternoon of technical sessions and lots of great stuff. You can see we have Guy Leach, Rodi Kosin, Kevin Nardone from Citrix, and we also have a stand-up comic this time, so that'll be really interesting to see that one. So definitely check out our calendar. The link is down at the bottom of the screen. You can take a screenshot and I'll throw the link in the chat for you later. Just a couple of notes before we get started. We are recording today's session, so you'll get a recording link emailed to you tomorrow from GoToWebinar. So be on the lookout for that. Please submit your questions at any time in the question box. We're going to take as many as we can today. And afterwards, please stick around. I'm going to throw a link in the chat to a short survey. It's anonymous and for CUGC use only. We just like to get your feedback. All right, so I would like to welcome back Pat Patterson. He is a developer, architect, evangelist with Citrix, and also Ryan Ververs-Bijkerk. I think I said it. He's probably grinning. I'm doing my best.
Quite close.
So welcome to the CUGC webinar stage. I'm going to hand things right over to you to get us going. So Pat, I'm going to send you the screen right now. All right, there you go.
All right. Thank you very much, Stephanie. And let me see, we can see, should be able to see, Ryan, my screen with no extra stuff on top of it. Great. So yes, as Stephanie introduced me, I'm Pat Patterson. I actually recently had a change of title, unfortunately, so I'm no longer have that architect evangelist title, which is disappointing. I gained a report, so I'm now director of developer evangelism, which is a little more clear but a little less fun. So I've been at Citrix for, wow, let me see now, about 10 months. And so I joined the developer ecosystem team here. Before Citrix, I've been at Sun Microsystems, Salesforce, and a startup called StreamSets. So although I'm pretty new to Citrix technology, I've been working with developer communities and REST APIs since they were a thing. If you want to hit me up on Twitter, I'm at Metadaddy, and you can reach out with any questions always at pat.patterson@citrix.com. So Ryan Ververs-Bijkerk, is that about right?
Yes, it's very close. Actually, Ryan and Ververs-Bijkerk, but it's really a Dutch name, so it's quite difficult to pronounce, of course. But that's me. I'm a technical evangelist at RawWorks, so I'm responsible at RawWorks for everything that has to do with code, and that includes also APIs and a lot of automation. I'm currently an active CTP, so part of the CTP community. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out on Twitter or hit me up with an email.
And Ryan and his colleague Elcho actually presented a session at Citrix Converge last November, which was the inspiration for this tutorial, in fact. So I have to give him credit there. So we're going to be covering in the next hour, we'll do a little bit of level setting, talk about what we actually mean when we talk about an API. I'm guessing some of our audience today, maybe they've been admins for some time. They're used to working in interactively in a console. So we'll just do just a minute or two on what we mean when we say API and what we mean when we say REST, because that's maybe it's a little bit mysterious. We toss this term around, and it doesn't always get defined very well. Then we're going to walk through some of the basics of interacting with Citrix Cloud via its APIs. So authenticating, sending and receiving data, some of the basics of interacting with that cloud service. And then as a bonus, we're going to get into some CVAD service APIs. So we're going to talk about retrieving your site ID, the very basics, and then get into creating a script. So actually looking at automating a repetitive task. We found a task that would be, useful but very tedious to do in the studio. So we'll just walk through this simple script to do some automation. So as we get started, I've got a couple of questions for you, the audience. So if we can run the poll, Stephanie, the first question is, what is your role in the company that you work for? So yeah, I mean, I'm in developer, I'm kind of counting whatever language you develop in. So it might be C#, Java, PowerShell, Python. Got some others there, administrator, CloudOps, DevOps engineer, we see a lot of those. And if you're not in one of those first four categories, yeah, please tell us in the chat which one you are. Okay, let's give it a few seconds for people to get their votes in there.
See,
okay, interesting. Okay, so this is great. So we've got what, 48% admins, so that's great. Definitely plenty of content here. Developers, we can fill in some gaps there. CloudOps, DevOps engineer, yeah, big focus on automation, and about nearly a third architects. Awesome. All right, and then the second poll question is, what kind of company do you work for? Now, this is a good opportunity, actually, Orion. I mean, what kind of company is RawWorks? Do you class yourself as an ISV or an SI?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think we are an SI system integrator. So we help companies to make sure that they use Citrix in a correct way and also help them into the new world. So if you look at RawWorks, we are especially focused on everything that has to do with micro apps. So we help our customers to get and start the journey into the new world. But yeah, we also see that a lot of customers are facing some difficulties. So and we help their in their traditional environment move them towards Citrix Cloud, and then prep them towards enablement with micro apps.
Great. Okay, and let's see. Oh yeah, about 2/3 Citrix customers. Yeah, and then I guess the rest is fairly evenly split between ISVs, SIs, and yeah, welcome to my fellow Citrites. 10%, I guess about a dozen Citrites in the audience. Awesome. And some people work for other companies. Interesting. Oh, a paper manufacturer. Oh, Dunder Mifflin in the house. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to be basing most of the technical walkthrough, the demo, on the tutorial, getting started with the Citrix Cloud REST APIs. I'd say this is essential. I'm basically going to be picking, copying and pasting code from this article in PowerShell. And I highly recommend you grab this URL, bit.ly, CTX REST APIs, and have that. If you want to follow along, we're going to go probably fast enough, slow enough that you could follow along if you really wanted to, but definitely have that in reserve so that you can go through some of the material later. And I'll give you that URL at the end as well if for folks that join late. So what do we mean when we talk about an API? If you go to Wikipedia, it'll tell you that it's an application programming interface. And this is a pretty old term. One of my first jobs out of university was programming 16-bit Windows. And we talked about the Windows API. And that was certainly predated the web and REST and all that kind of thing. But it's an abstract term that defines interactions between different software components. Hardware can have an API. If you think about the ways that the operating system interacts with the hardware, that's, it's a well-specified programming interface. And the reason that APIs are really exciting for us, and in the world of cloud and working with Citrix in particular, is that they allow us to automate repetitive tasks. So in general, anything you can do through the user interface, through the GUI, the studio, you can automate through a script. And it also allows us to extend systems, right, Ryan? When you build a micro app, you're extending the capabilities of Citrix workspace and
Yep.
consuming APIs from other systems.
Yeah, basically what you can do is just cherry pick a specific functionality or the data that you need and manipulate it in order for your users to consume it. So it's an easy way to execute tasks while also consuming data.
Right.
Yeah.
And what we see increasingly, especially with the world of DevOps, is infrastructure as code. So rather than having a run book where you have to manually follow instructions to bring up infrastructure in some online or system, you actually write code to do the equivalent, and then you get to version control that. You can bring it back, make changes, and rebuild your infrastructure very, very easily and much, much quicker than doing it manually. And then when we talk about REST, yeah, as I said, this is a term we throw around and we don't always stop to talk about. The idea with REST is it stands for representational state transfer. And it really, you don't have to go into detail on what that means. It just means that we have URLs that represent resources that we're manipulating. Those are the nouns in REST. And we use the HTTP protocol, just the same as a browser retrieving web pages, to manipulate those resources. So a common example is, you might have some API, you have users in there, each user has an identifier. So you can manipulate users using a URL like this. And so to get information about that user, you just issue an HTTP GET with that URL, just the same as retrieving a web page. And then say if you wanted to update that user's email address or any other piece of information, you might use a post method, just like submitting a form post, filling out your credit card details on the web. And usually, not always, but usually, we use this format called JSON, JavaScript object notation, to exchange information with RESTful APIs. You still see a bit of XML, but I think the industry has gravitated towards JSON just because it's fairly concise, but still pretty readable. So this is like a very, very simple example of how our user resource might look if we were to get that API. We might, instead of a web page, we'd get back some JSON with those different fields, properties. Okay, so you'll be glad to know we can leave the slides behind and dive right in. So let me see if I get up Chrome and my terminal, and we should be sharing this. And let me just Get rid of that.
While you're prepping, there's a question in the meantime. And the question is from Richard, and the question is, with security as is, why HTTP request rather than HTTPS?
That's a really good question. I was really using HTTP there as just a shorthand. So yeah, it's good to point out. Really, we use HTTPS. So that's all you'll see here. And you know, just like in the browser, we've got a certificate there, and it's secure. Yeah, that was good to catch me on that one.
Yeah.
So HTTPS, but yeah.
In general, you can do both. So you can do REST call on both HTTP and HTTPS. So when you're developing a backend and creating an API, then it's rather easier to just hit the compile, running the code, and then do an HTTP request without the hassle of a certificate. But when putting to production, always use HTTPS.
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, so because it's 2021 and I have 4 people crammed into my house working and studying, somebody has started to print a document. So there might be a little bit of background noise for a second or two. Okay, so this is the tutorial that I mentioned. So getting started with the Citrix Cloud REST APIs. And it's my son's math assignment. And so we've written this in, we're going to go through the PowerShell track, but there's also Python and curl. If you like to work from the Linux or Mac command line, you can use the curl command line tool to go through the exact same work. And I'm using PowerShell 7.1, which is the current version. Pretty much everything works with PowerShell 5. The reason I'm using 7.1 is that it works on my Mac, and that's the world I've come from. And I'll point out where I think there's one minor difference. Okay, so the first thing we need to do in using the cloud, Citrix Cloud APIs, and this is in common with almost every API you use, you need to authenticate. So you need to pass some credentials to the API and get back a token that you then use in every subsequent API call. Now, it's a best practice, I'd say an essential practice, to never, ever, ever put secrets in your code. Okay, you might think, you know, just for speed, you'll put the client ID or a password or whatever in some PowerShell, and that'll be fine. But inevitably, what happens is you share that with somebody either by email, or you end up posting it to GitHub a year later, and suddenly other people can call APIs as if they were you. So a good practice is to put them into environment variables and then reference those in your code. And that's exactly what I've done, and I won't show you that step for obvious reasons, but I did that before I started the PowerShell over here. So I've started PowerShell, and what I'm going to need to do is exchange my credentials for a token. And we use OAuth 2, so I think this is just in the past few months we standardized Citrix Cloud on OAuth 2, and that's a widely used protocol. There's different flavors of it. It's the same protocol you use if you sign on to a website and it sends you over to Google and it says, hey, do you want to share your email address and personal information with this website? And then it forwards you back. In this case, we're actually using a non-interactive flow. We're just providing our application's client ID and secret. Now, to create these, I went into Citrix Cloud and into the identity and access management and created an application there. That gave me these client ID and secret. And so now I can copy this little bit of code, paste it in, and I should get back a response. Now, I'm sure some people are asking themselves, well, you know, this invoke web request, that's great. It calls an API, but there's also invoke REST method. You know, I could get the information back a little bit easier. So the first thing I want to do is kind of go into why I've used web request and why you know, you might want to use it as well. The great thing is that you get back in the response a lot of detail on what happened. So this is the HTTP status code and, you know, text description. You get all of the raw content that came back. You get all of the headers and so on. And this is really useful when things go wrong. Okay, if everything goes right, then you're really only interested in the content. But when things go wrong, you could get HTML in here occasionally with APIs. So it's really useful to just be able to see at a lower level what happened. And I'll show you actually what happens if you use invoke REST method, because that's the other common one you'll see. So I can use command completion there. And it's nice because it takes exactly the same arguments as invoke web request. It's just a little bit of a higher level interface. And so you can do that. And what you get back is, rather than the JSON, it parses the response into a PowerShell object. So that's ready to use straight away. So it's a little bit more convenient, but you do miss out on a little bit more information. So it's really, I'd say it's a matter of style, right, Ryan?
Yep.
Some people prefer one, some people go with the other.
Well, like you mentioned, if something goes wrong, it's difficult, or a little bit more difficult, to get the inside information when using the invoke REST method. Because you have to catch it, and then it's at least explicit in the message of that specific exception. Well, with the invoke web request, you have everything as you see here on the screen, and even also the error messages.
Right. Now, it can be a bit tricky to use this. So what we're going to do is just convert that from JSON. And so what we do is we end up with exactly the same information as we would have had with invoke REST method. We end up with a token type, an access token, and I could use format list to show you that in its entirety, but this is actually my identifying token. So I'm going to keep that to myself and just show you that the other part of the token is called expires in. And so this token's valid for an hour. So as you're experimenting with the API in this kind of interactive mode, exploring it from the PowerShell command line, you should bear that in mind. And if you start to get errors, I think it's a 401 HTTP error, it's probably that it's been an hour since you did this and your access token expired. So that's something to bear in mind. So this is great. We've got a token. How do we use it? Well, interacting with the platform APIs is a great way to start, because you can sign up for Citrix Cloud and you get access to this kind of management interface, and you can do that free. And then these platform APIs allow you to kind of explore some of the information that's here without having you know, a production system in play or having any entitlements. You can just get a cloud account and play with it immediately. So the first thing we need to do is to put that token in the right format to send it with our API calls. And that's what this bit of code does.
Before we go into the next details, can I ask two questions? Because there are two questions in the question.
Yeah.
So let's try to keep it a little bit interactive. So, and I think the first one is quite interesting. And it's why should we use a REST API? Well, we have also the PowerShell SDKs, which covers most of the capabilities in Citrix Cloud.
Yeah, now that's a really good question. So I'm showing you how to access the API directly. And the PowerShell SDK is a layer on top of those. So it's a different style of working. And the really nice thing about this is that you can then access other RESTful APIs once you understand these patterns. You could access APIs in Azure or on Google's set of APIs, and you'll understand these exact same patterns. So certainly the SDK gives you a level above these, but this really gives you an understanding into what's going on underneath. And it's good to understand these, even if you end up using the SDKs. It's always good to understand a system one level lower than you're actually using it, especially when things start to go wrong.
But also, if you look at new functionality, an API can be updated on the server side, on the cloud side. So you can basically quicker consume new functionalities on an API. Well, if you're depending on an SDK, then the SDK needs to be updated in order to consume a new capability.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, as soon as new functionality is released, you can access it. And that might mean that, if you're using scripting, you can change things immediately rather than having to download and install and, roll out SDKs to different machines. So I see another. Go on, Ryan.
Yeah, so I got another question is regarding the timeout of your token. So by default is the value you just showed is 3600, and the question is if it can be changed.
That's a great question. As far as I know, that is fixed. But yeah, I would imagine that if it's not possible to change, there'll be a setting at some point in time where
it's a little depending. Mostly the timeouts are always driven from the provider of the API. Now in case of Citrix, it's a fixed value, but if you look for example in Azure DevOps, and you have the ability to create an access token for a longer period of time, you have some little bit of flexibility in there.
Yeah.
One thing you can do, and what I always recommend to do, is when you generate an API, is to include a timestamp into the object. You can just manipulate that in the or add a property towards your token object, which you can use later to validate if it expired or yes or no.
Yeah, absolutely. We can extend this object to say whatever, and decorate that for sure.
Yeah.
And then a follow-up question from Partha is, a challenge is that you either have to generate a bearer token for each request or keep track of the last generated token. Yeah, and that's a fair comment that, this low-level approach does leave more in your hands, and that's the trade-off here. You have a bit more flexibility, but you have to do a bit more work. But I would say, if a script is going to, perform some piece of work, then in under an hour, which I think most scripts probably do, then you can just authenticate at the top and carry on. If you've got something that runs periodically, on the other hand, you'd probably want to get a token on each call. And of course, you can catch that error, as the SDKs do. You can catch that error and reauthenticate. Okay, so let's move on. And so we got some HTTP headers here. And again, I can just have a look at that. And what that does is it just sets the HTTP authorization header to CWS auth. So I think that's Citrix Workspace Services, what Citrix Cloud was originally called. And it's a bearer token, which means that you don't have to perform any signing or anything like that. You just present this token and Citrix Cloud will recognize you. So let's use it. So I set my customer ID up in the environment, so I can pull that out and I'll share that because it's not particularly useful to anybody apart from me. But so I've got my customer ID from the environment, and I've built a URL with that customer ID. So this is where we get into this idea of these RESTful URLs. So, you know, this is the API. This identifies my customer, and I want to get back these resource locations. So at that point, I just call the invoke a web request, and I get back a response with that information. So I can see it's all worked, and what I've found is that the easiest way to make this visible, so I could just convert it into a, so to manipulate it in your script, you'll typically want to convert it from JSON, and then you get a PowerShell object. But if we're just kind of working interactively and we want to get a quick view of what we got back, then it's useful just to convert it back into JSON so that we can just see this hierarchical view. I find much easier to deal with than digging through the object like this. And one good tip is for this kind of object, the defaults work fine. So you know, you can just say convert to JSON, you get the same thing. But with more deeply nested structures, this is as far as convert to JSON will go by default. So it's good to put a depth parameter there so you see all of the data. Otherwise, it can be a little bit misleading. So this is great. We've authenticated, we've called an API, and we've got some information back on our resource location. You know, that's, you know, great. We can do exactly that in the web UI here. We could just go in here and look at our resource location. But let's do something a little bit more advanced. What we can do is we can start to pull back more data. So here, if I pull back the service states, that's going to give us information on, you know, what we have entitlements for, and it's going to give me back a whole lot of information, and more than we can see without actually digging through that UI, and actually probably more than we want. So if we want to focus in on what's relevant to us here, we can use PowerShell to narrow that down. So I know you have opinions on my PowerShell here, Ryan. I'll do this, and then you can share them. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that list, service states items, and what I can do is I can say, okay, I only want to know about services that are in the production trial state. Okay, I'm not interested in ones I'm not onboarded to, and I'm not interested in ones that I've got production entitlement. So which ones have I got on trial? So I can build this command up and say, okay, let's filter that down to these 6. Now, if I'm really only interested in the service names and I don't need all this other information, I can filter it again on specific properties, and I end up with a really nice list here of just those service names that are in production. So here we're starting to get towards the real utility here. We can write script and just get exactly that information we need rather than hunting through the user interface. Now, Ryan, I know you commented before, so I can. It's the select object here, yeah, that this can go a little wrong sometimes. Is that right?
Yeah. So the beautiful thing of PowerShell is that you have a quite free way to write, in this case, a filter, so the where object statement, and you can write it in different ways, where you can also leverage like sub properties in an object. Sometimes it's a little bit depending, of course, on the API itself and the object that you're receiving, but you have a property and you want to filter on a property which is below. So in that case, you have to write it a little bit different with the curly braces, where you can filter down deeper into the properties of the objects that you received.
Right, because if I had if there was a sub property here like state.name, this is going to fail.
Yeah, it won't work in this way. So you have to do it with the curly braces and then the $_
Right. And it stands in for, this is the object that we're looking at right now, and then we can dive into that particular thing. And so if we get rid of the fictitious name and we close this off here, is this right, Brian? This should do about the same thing?
Yeah, you have to remove the first $.
Oh. Yeah. You led me astray here. What's going on?
Yeah, the first $, before the curly bracket, you have to remove it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Oh, you see, this is why I asked you along, because I'm a total noob at PowerShell here. All right, there we go. So
it's really important if you have for a little bit depending on your writing style, but have to have a consistent writing style in your PowerShell if you move your code towards production. But if in case of filtering deeper, you have to do it the way with the curly braces.
Yeah. So PowerShell allows you a little bit of shorthand here, but this is probably the best way. I need to go back and correct this. Okay, so we've got a nice list of services, and that's okay. And we've just retrieved a bit of data. Let's try sending some data. So I'm going to create a notification. So that's going to pop up here in Citrix Cloud. So I could notify all the admins in this particular customer if there were more than just me in my development sandbox. So I need to build a notification object. Now, there's a couple of things I need to create. So I need to get a timestamp. And so I can use PowerShell's get date, and this O format gives it to me in this ISO 8601 format. So you'll see this a lot with APIs. So you've got year, month, day, you've got the capital T, and then hour, minute, second, down to, what's this, microseconds here? And you've got an absolutely essential time zone at the end. You sometimes see a Z there if this time is in Zulu time, UTC rather, which we call Zulu time because Z or Z for Zulu. And I've also created this unique identifier. So again, if you've worked with Windows for any length of time as an admin, I'm sure you recognize this pattern, this GUID or UID pattern. So we build these into our nice notification object here. So let's make sure we copy that. There we go. And so I'm going to send a notification. I'm going to send it to all the admins in Citrix Cloud, include that timestamp and then the unique ID. You know, this is an informational message, and it's telling me that it's dinner time. And of course, I've got fish and chips. And again, I can get that back. So I could get it back in this format, or I could say again, convert it. Let's grab one of our, let's just type it in. So convert to JSON mine. So let's see. So we get some information there, and if we do minus depth 10, that's just the same. It's not very deeply nested. So let's send that off, and what we should get is a response. So again, here we go. We've got our nice response. Let's unpack it. Why is it not turning to it? There we go. And this tells us that it was accepted. You know, we got that 200 there, which is always the good thing. And it basically repeats back what we sent to it. And we have a notification. And I love it when this happens. It actually works. And Citrix Cloud is telling me that it is, come on, dinner time. Excellent. So we're able to send and receive information here. So let's get on to CVAD service. Now, here we're interacting with one of the various services. So if we go back to home here, we can see I've got various entitlements here. One of them is virtual apps and desktops. And if I go in here, you know, I get the web studio view of my little CVAD deployment, and I can go in and sort through my machine catalogs and machines and so on. I think my home internet is not as fast as it could be, but you get the gist here. I've got machine catalogs here and machines and so on. But I can also play with them in a script. So the first thing to be aware of is that when we work with CVAD, we have to provide the customer ID in an HTTP header. So that's one of these things that we send along with the request. Now, I'm actually going to do it wrong here. I'm going to do this without setting that header up and just send the token that we already got, so you can see what happens when you inevitably forget. We get an error. Now, it's actually thrown an error and given us the content here, and it says missing required header, and quite helpfully it tells us that we're actually missing Citrix customer ID because we should have done this step. We should have set that customer ID, and we're also saying that we're working with JSON data. So having done that, we can have another go here and copy that data, and what we should get is some nice information. Now, this is where we get into this depth thing that I was talking about, because if we were to forget about that, you notice that I don't get a lot in sites. And, you know, I think it does give us a warning there, but it's so easy to miss that and start looking at this and getting really confused because, hey, I know I've got a site. It's giving me an empty string. So we just get into the habit, I think, of using like -depth 10. You can go up to 100 there if you really want to. And it gives you back, and I've got back my site ID. So that's going to be really useful for using this API, because I might have multiple sites and I need to specify that as I start to manipulate resources. So I've made one API call, and in the tutorial, I jump into this script. And what I can do now is actually walk you through this, because this is a really nice way of seeing how to get some useful work done. Now, what this script does is it iterates through all the machines in a catalog, and it reboots any that have 0 sessions. So this is something that you might want to do periodically. Reboot those machines, make sure they've got updated image, whatever. You don't want to reboot machines that people are using, so you want to check for 0 sessions. And it's something that would be pretty tedious to do in the web studio, because you would just have to click all around the place to get this done. But as you can see, it's actually really not many lines of code. There's a little bit of setup up here, an authentication, and then a loop here to loop through them. And let's unpack this a little bit. What I'm going to do is, when we're using this, I'm going to be passing 3 parameters. So we set this up here, and we pass it a customer ID, the site ID, so we got that, or rather, we got it there, and a catalog ID, so we don't have that yet. And in the script, we're going to do exactly what we did interactively in the shell here, getting that token. We're going to set up those headers, and then using the catalog ID that gets passed in, we're going to get a list of machines in that catalog. Now, what I'm going to do is work through this interactively, because it's a great way of exploring these APIs and the way that they work. So I've got customer ID, Okay, I already set that up, so let's just double check. Yep. And I need site ID. So I don't have anything in my site ID variable yet, although, oops, I do from earlier on. This is what happens when you practice your session and you don't reset everything. So that would be null, and if it were null,
You can make it null.
Yeah, I know. So what do I do, Ryan? Is it just null?
Just $, and then
$.
null. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm one of those polyglot programmers, so I start getting confused between different languages. Okay, so let's imagine it was already null.
There you go.
Yeah. So we can. One of the really nice things here, and using, it's tempting to just like write a script in an editor and then run it and then edit it and then run it. I really like using this interactive mode because we can do things like this. We can say, okay, so we can say $me equals this stuff we got back from this API, and then we can go through with tab completion. So we can say, okay, how do we get down to this ID that we actually want? Well, we're going to say $me.customers. So it just fills it in for me. And customers is an array, so I'm going to need a 0 there. And let's see what's in there. It's going to be sites, so I can just get that started. And then I can do things like, okay, how many sites do I have? 1. Or I could get that first element there. And again, I can go down to see, okay, it's the ID that I want. So I can see that, and I can also, whoops, what did I do? I tried to use up arrow to get my previous thing there, but for some reason it went weird. And I can do $site ID. So I can build my script in a very natural way here, and then kind of write it up into my text editor as a result of my exploration. So I've got my site ID. So how do I get this catalog ID? So the really nice thing here is that the way that these APIs work is that I can get a list of machine catalogs by just grabbing this bit of the URL and remembering the headers. So let's do it without. Why is it?
You have to end it with a double
quote.
quote
The wrong
instead of a single
kind
quote.
Of quote. Yeah. You see, Ryan is my safety net. Right, there we go. And it's going to say that. So let's do it as we should, and say minus headers, $headers, and we get back this lovely response. And we're going to get a whole load of stuff in here because I've got a whole bunch of catalogs. So we just say response, convert it from JSON, convert from JSON, and I'm going to say .items, and we can pipe that through select object name, ID. So we've got a whole bunch. Go on, Ryan.
Oh no, I thought you have to specify the content object, but it worked. All right.
Yeah. So that's a good point. So you might think because this is listed out as content, but PowerShell knows that if you try and pipe this through something, that's the field it's going to use. So this is just a little bit of shorthand there that you can use.
Yeah, same result.
Yep. So you're learning stuff as well, Ryan.
Yeah.
There we go. So I'm gonna use this one here. So rather than spelunking through this content, I'm just gonna say $catalog ID equals, and I'm gonna copy and paste my first machine catalog. And you will do this, I guarantee, and get this error message where it's like, what the heck's going on? Everything looks right, but in fact, I should have quoted that ID there as a string, and then everything's happy. So at this point, I've set up the same variables as we would have had parameters. So I can get that list of machines. So we can just kind of run that interactively. And I can see that in machines.items, we have a machine. So we pulled that out, and we can kind of do what the script would do, just to illustrate it, and say machine equals. So this is the first time around the loop. It's going to do machines.item0. So get that first one, and then we can copy and paste this and kind of dig into what's going on. So it's going to try and reboot the machine. Well, first of all, it's going to check that session count, and we can kind of do that by eye here. So it's going to check that session count is 0, and if so, it's going to try and do this. And what's going to happen is it's going to fail, because if we go up here a little bit, we're not actually managing the power on this machine. So the API tells us the machine doesn't support the specified power action. Gives us a whole lot of information here. Now, this is great if you're exploring, you get a lot of information on what's going on. In our script, we probably don't want this level of detail. We probably want to extract it a little bit. And that's what's going on here. We're using exception handling to catch this exception. And we're saying, okay, we're going to try doing this, and we're going to catch this HTTP exception. And we're actually going to extract that error message and convert it from JSON, and we're going to make it a little bit more palatable. So if we run this whole bit of code here, we'll do the same thing with a little bit of wrapping. And so the script's going to print out requesting reboot for this machine, and it's going to say, that doesn't support that power action. So luckily, I do have another catalog here, this power managed catalog, so I can grab that and say, okay, so catalog ID equals, put that in quotes there, and then what I can actually do is just say /reboot idle, because I do happen to have this saved in the current directory. And I can say minus catalog ID $catalog ID minus site ID $site. You can see the way this is going. And then minus customer, right? So this is what how you would call your script. You might be doing it from some automation. You might be like iterating through catalogs or whatever, but you're not going to do that because that's wrong. That would be customer ID. And it's going to run. And now this is just doing its authentication. It's calling that API, and we've succeeded there in requesting that reboot. And it actually, if we go into the logging here, and yeah, don't show me again, I'm well aware of this, and just get it down to today, we can see that we've got that failed reboot there twice, and then we've got a successful reboot of this particular machine. And shout out to Christo Smallwood, who actually set up this environment for me. So we've successfully iterated through the single machine there in my toy environment and rebooted it because it had 0 sessions. And there is a whole CVAD learning journey that has more examples that we've put together there. Once you've got these basics, you can extend the principles across the whole API. So you can see here, if I make this a little bit bigger, it'll pop out there. So there's some information here on getting that client ID, as I mentioned earlier on. I kind of skipped over, but there's here we've got publishing apps via API, and enumerating sessions. So there's all kinds of operations you can do. And the great thing here is, you're not limited to the, what we built into the Web Studio. Anything available you can access via the APIs. You can get into the hypervisors and all sorts.
I think that's indeed the main goal, because there's a single comment, and I really like this, because there's also an auto-skill functionality to turn off the machines or reboot the machines, of course.
Yeah.
But this is just an example to get you started and get familiar with the commands,
right,
and how to consume the API. But the possibilities are endless, and you can do way more, and even configure the auto-skill configuration for all the machine catalogs and delivery groups.
Exactly. You could iterate through looking for a particular string as part of the tag. You whatever, like anything you want to do, and this Web Studio under the covers is using exactly these APIs. So everything you can do here, you can automate and do automatically here. So that's a great point. Okay, so one last thing to mention is that CVAD REST API is still in tech preview stage. You'll occasionally see server error 500. We didn't see one today, but I have seen one from time to time. There's still some rough edges there. So it's great for experimenting with, but expect it to go into production and be generally available soon. But it's certainly accessible to experiment, and you can do some really cool stuff with scripting. So wrapping up, and I guess we've probably got a few more questions as well that we have a couple of minutes for. Get to grips with this. Try automating some repetitive tasks. If you're just doing gets, you're just retrieving data. You won't be changing anything. You won't be rebooting machines. You have to explicitly send information to the API to kind of mess things up. Check out that learning journey that I mentioned. All the APIs are documented there. And then one plug for our developer newsletter, bit.ly/CTX dev news. So that's a monthly newsletter. It's all relevant to Citrix developers. I actually compile it myself. And as new services come on stream, so for example, the endpoint management, we feature those in that newsletter. So it's a great way to keep up with new capabilities, new versions. So when that CVAD REST API goes into generally available status, you'll certainly hear about it in the developer newsletter. So let's take a question or two, and there's that tutorial URL in case you missed it at the beginning. So Ryan,
yeah, there are actually a couple questions. Do you already know if there is the capability to query the cloud licenses, the Citrix Cloud licenses on the REST API?
I believe that is not yet available. So let's have a look on the dev portal. So this is your kind of entrance into this world of APIs. And so generally, if things are available, they come up here. So no, I don't think license APIs are yet available, but we certainly have them on the list. This is the big list here, and this is also like what's new here. So like mobile app management, endpoint management came out recently. But yeah,
I think this also goes into the following question is regarding the API capabilities for ShareFile, also known as the content collaboration services.
Yeah, so the ShareFile is kind of I'd say it's there. It's not really a part. Well, I'll come clean here and say I haven't done that much with the ShareFile APIs yet, but certainly, as a REST API, it behaves in the same way, but it's got its own documentation here. So I'm looking forward to getting to grips with it. But yeah, it works it's got its own way of getting an API key and then working with the different resources that are available over there.
Yeah, so what you see is that some services are already ahead with all the API capabilities, and some are still working on extending
Precisely,
the API capabilities.
Yeah. And the really nice thing is, as we build these out, we've got one API gateway, so that single token will work for all of the APIs that you access through Citrix Cloud.
Okay.
One more question. You pick, Ryan.
Yeah, there are a couple questions coming in. So I think this is an important one. And you mentioned that the CVAD API is still in tech preview. Should we already use it in production?
Technically not. I would say it's a great time to get to grips with it, to learn about it, to write some scripts, and then it should be going into production soon. I'm not the PM, so I can't give you a date. But since the Web Studio is using it and the Web Studio is generally available, then the underlying API should have that production status soon.
Yeah,
okay.
I think it's you can indeed already prepare to transition towards the API,
yeah.
but I think it's also already good practice to get familiar with talking to APIs, because Citrix is not the only company that's enabling their services with APIs. There's endless of possibilities and a lot of organizations that are providing these capabilities.
I mean, this is a general skill, and it's just anybody, certainly anybody involved in DevOps, absolutely should be able to call raw APIs like this, just because you won't always have an SDK. So with that, we have prizes to give away, the much sought after Citrix AirPods. So Steph, do we have a slide with the questions, or do I just need to refresh my memory?
I do. Let me, it's always tricky when you have slides with animations. I don't want them to pop up too fast. So let me get that.
Yeah, it's best that we have an expert doing this.
We'll see. Okay. All right. There's the slide. All right. Now all you see is the Citrix branded AirPods. So, all right. So our first question, these will be a good test to see if you've been paying attention. And Ryan, can you help me while I'm doing this? Can you help me see who's the first person to get the right answer? Hopefully you know the right answers. Okay.
Hopefully I do.
Okay, so the first question, we focused on PowerShell in this webinar. What are the other two options for following the tutorial?
All right. Okay, we've got a few answers. Wow, people were paying attention. Who was first?
Yeah. I think it's Corey Evans.
Corey Evans, excellent. Yeah, I see Robin Stoltz got in there earlier, but he just got curl. Yes, the two options were Python and curl. And I'm quite proud of that tab navigation, because I actually did that myself. Okay, question number 2.
What protocol does Citrix Cloud use for obtaining an API token? And we're looking for the version and the name. Very specific.
Wow, instantly. Oh, wow. Who was that?
Is that?
I think.
I'll go ahead and say the answer. Yeah. So it looks like Chris Davis.
Yep. Yep. I would say that. OAuth 2. That's what we were looking for. Excellent.
And the last one, I want to know, this one's hard. You had to really be paying attention. I say it's hard, but somebody will probably zip it really fast, just like they have been. What's Pat having for dinner? Food.
Oh, wow.
Wow, people were paying attention.
No, they did listen. Awesome.
Yeah, excellent.
So,
okay, the answer.
Joseph.
Yeah.
Yep, Joseph DiCristofano. Hopefully I said that one right.
Absolutely.
All right, I got it. Awesome,
Impressive.
guys.
All right. Okay,
So
so
I do have a couple links I'm going to throw in the chat for you. Let me just work my way back over to that window. There you go. So that's the survey for you. It's short and anonymous, just like to get your feedback. And there's also a place for you to write in any other topics that you'd like to see in webinars like this. And a link to the CUGC events calendar so that you can access all of our local meetings, Excel events, and all of our webinars. And we have a very busy webinar calendar coming up. So definitely check it out. All right, thank you so much, Pat and Ryan. Really appreciate having you guys on today.
thank you.
Thank you
And
very
you
much.
can send me those questions. So there were a few we didn't get to that I can follow up with.
Yes, I absolutely will. I'll
Yeah.
send you all the questions and the poll results and all that stuff. So,
Wonderful. Great.
all right, everyone, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Everybody stay happy, healthy, and safe. And we'll see you at another event soon, hopefully next week. We have a lot of stuff to do next week. So hopefully we'll see you guys soon. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And it's a wrap.